and this is the Convict Australia podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're exploring the fascinating and often brutal history of Norfolk Island. The convict era on the island is divided into two distinct phases: the colonial period, which ran from 1788 to 1814, and the later penal settlement, which began in 1825 and earned a grim reputation as hell on earth. Norfolk Island expert Cathy Dunn has kindly agreed to come on the show and talk to us about this fascinating period of convict history. Welcome to the show, Cathy.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about when they first arrived?
On the 6th of March, 1788, after a few days travelling around Norfolk Island, Philip Gidley King landed on Norfolk Island down what's called downtown, or he called it Sydney Town. And it stayed there till the 27th of February, 1814. There were, yes, convicts on that first voyage aboard the HMAT Supply. HMAT means His Majesty Arms Tender. And it was the Supply and the Golden Grove that was bringing not only provisions but also convicts over to Norfolk Island. Then the largest ship to bring the most amount of convicts in one voyage, of course, was HMS Sirius. But when it went down on the 19th of March, there was only one convict aboard. All these people say, my convict was shipwrecked on Norfolk Island. No, they weren't. They were off the ship 4 days beforehand. They were going to go to Norfolk Island anyway, and they weren't sent because they were naughty. Only 35 colonial sentences were sent to Norfolk Island in the Colonial Settlement. All the rest, it was just part of their actual service.
And I believe some of them had skills for cultivating flax plants.
And even in the penal settlement, many of the convicts were chosen who were sent to Norfolk Island because of their skills, be it carpentry, be it carpentry, a mason. Convicts with skills, because they were needed. They're called mechanics, actually. We think of mechanics today, someone who repairs our car. But no, back in the day, mechanics were people who had trades. And trades were very important, including the tailor and also the bootmaker.
What other kind of work were the convicts doing during this period?
Most of the convicts were assigned to agriculture because the island the orders included to be self-sustainable. And that was also the order in the penal settlement. So they were growing crops. The women convict every morning used to have to go out and hand pick off the army grubs off all the maize, the corn, and all the other produce. So at one stage, Norfolk Island was supplying Port Jackson, or the settlement of Port Jackson at Sydney Cove, with produce because Parramatta, Rouse Hill, and the Hawkesbury had all been affected by floods and there was no harvest. So Norfolk Island administration were actually sending stores back to Sydney Cove.
So tell me more about the Sirius. It was sent there because the colony was starving, is that right? And they wanted to send more convicts over there.
That is correct. And look, the Sirius was very lucky to even make it in the first instance. With Captain John Hunter at the helm, it nearly wrecked on South Head as it was leaving Port Jackson. Not all crew were aboard. There were 9 crew left, and they left back in Sydney Cove, and they established the lookout at South Head. And their job was to alert the settlement at Sydney Cove with the shooting of a cannon to announce the arrival of a ship. The convicts, they kept married convicts together as much as they could, and they just divided the colony into two, and over half went to Norfolk Island. If a convict woman had been shacked up with a Marine, most of them were actually separated. But there's no record or report or letter in regards to how they divided up the people, whether people put up their hand or whether they just walked through the centre of an assembly with the convicts. There's no record of how they were decided to go.
So you said that when the Sirius arrived, most of the convicts, all but one, had disembarked?
Disembarked over at Cascade, which is on the other side of the island, to the main settlement. So overnight, with babes in arms, very little clothing, they had to actually walk over some big hills over to the main settlement. And they also did that in August 1790 and in June 1825. So if it's good landing on one side of the island, it means it's bad landing on the other. The shipwreck of HMS Sirius occurred due to the fact that Captain John Hunter took the Sirius too close to shore in the first place. The tide turned, a wind picked up, and regardless of all the tacking that he did and even releasing an anchor, he was not able to get away from the obvious reef that was there. So he got caught inside the bay with the reef. A wave came up. It was not a gale wind. It was just a westerly wind. But he was too close to shore and there was no room for him to get away from the reef. A wave hit the boat, picked up the boat and landed on the actual reef. And it took them 2 days to take everyone off the ship. And there were no drownings from HMS Sirius. You might read in some books there were a few drownings, some First Fleet officers, some convicts. There were no drownings off HMS Sirius. Yes, they came ashore drenched and scratched to the bone because they had been physically dragged over a coral reef and salt water, and there was no accommodation for all these extra crew.
Was there a lot of supplies that were lost?
Oh, definitely, yes. Now, 2 convicts actually put their hand up and said, we'll go out and we'll look. No, we'll get all the provisions off the boat. So they threw the cattle over the shore, over the deck, and the cattle swam to shore, the sheep and the goats. Then they started to get all the luggage, most of it from crew and also the Marines, and the luggage floated out to sea. So the sheep knew what to do, but the chests, etc., didn't. They did wash up on shore about a week later, but they had been absolutely destroyed by the ocean.
And this was devastating because it only left them one ship.
Not only a ship for provisions, but ship for defence too. And we have to remember that it was also a defence ship. And yes, that there were 12 crew members who were sent back to Sydney Cove straight away. So they weren't shipwrecked. They were shipwrecked on Norfolk, but only for 4 days. They were sent back to Sydney Cove. There were 80 crew members, including the captain, who stayed on Norfolk Island for 11 months. And that's when a ship was actually sent to go and get them and bring them back.
Were there many babies born during this period?
Hundreds and hundreds of babies. Like the first baby was born on Norfolk Island in January 1789.
Was that by Anne Inett?
Anne Inett, yes. And the baby was called Norfolk King. The second baby was called Sydney King. He was born in Sydney. not on Norfolk. A lot of history books from the 1940s, etc., have Sydney King being born on Norfolk. No. Philip Gidley King, Anne Annette, and Norfolk King went back to Sydney Cove on the 24th of March.
Were there a lot more opportunities for convicts during this first period?
Oh, yes, because there was a lot of land. They did overpromise land. Marine settlers were coming to Norfolk Island who had never been to Norfolk Island, but they had been told about the beautiful land that was there for farming. So when they left the Marines, they then travelled to Norfolk Island aboard the Atlantic in November 1791, got off a couple of days later, got married, hooked back up with some of their previous lovers. No, got to keep that all in line, don't we? And they were promised 60 acres. Okay, but there still wasn't enough land on Norfolk Island for all the land that they'd been told they would give out. So Charles Grimes, the surveyor, had to resurvey the lands and move boundaries 4 times. There's probably a 5th time before he actually got it right. And well, one convict, Andrew Goodwin, not only lost his 12 acres because it was only on a lease, it wasn't a grant, because it was absorbed with the adjoining block to give William Cable his 60-acre grant. So there's a difference between grants and leases. And then by 1793, they were selling the land. They were subdividing land. It was big dollars. And people, when they're reading maps, if a person had 60 acres, oh, they must be a marine settler or a seaman settler. That's not the case. They're actually convicts because they were selling their produce to the stores. And this is where they were making their money to actually buy land from marine settlers who were leaving the island. There was an issue in 1793 and 1794. They would not pay for their crops. So they said, right, we're out of here. So the first mass exodus was the Kitty in March 1793, followed by November 1796, a whole lot of other Marines and convict settlers who are now free. They just gave up, and they actually gave their land grants back. Some did sell them because the land grants and leases still hadn't been officially approved.
Were there many overseers during that time?
Not compared to the penal settlement. There were constables rather than overseers. There was 3 superintendents for the different settlements on Norfolk Island, but there weren't the overseers and gang overseers like there was in the penal settlement.
If a convict misbehaved, was the punishment given there, or did they have to go to Sydney to be tried?
Depending on the crime or the matter, if it was a misdemeanor, it was normally dealt with on Norfolk Island. It could range from playing cards, getting lashes, not reporting for work, employing convicts for your own personal use rather than them doing their public work. So, no, we've got 25 lashes, 50 lashes. When King came back in November 1791, he had no tolerance for stealing. People were just robbing the gardens, and he was ordering 500 lashes.
Wow.
So we talk about the penal settlement being harsh. There is also a harsh side to the colonial settlement. You read about it and it's all very nice. You got mum and dad and 4 kids, maybe 5. Then you got mum and dad separating or going their own way, and mum hooking up with someone else and having another 4 kids. And there is that society on Norfolk Island that there was a farming settlement. Everything was just flowing along. But there was also the harsh side of Norfolk Island colonial settlement too.
And did that extend to the female convicts?
Yes, it did. Yes, if you were rude or nasty or called one of the Marines such a so-and-so, you received lashes. You were also put into jail. You were also put into chains. So there is the underside of the colonial settlement.
Are there any standout convicts that you like to discuss on your tours?
I talk about them all. Of course, the people being descended from convicts, we do concentrate on those convicts, be it their land, their arrival, even their departure. So one departure, Robert Nash, he didn't want to go. He was taken off the island under arms. In other words, they held a gun to his head and said, "You have to leave."
Why did he want to stay? He had land?
Well, he didn't want to stay on Norfolk Island. A lot of the people did not want to leave Norfolk Island. And then in 1824, when there was a few rumours going around that it might be reopening, there's letters from Van Diemen's Land saying, "We'll go back to Norfolk Island. We're quite happy to go back." But the penal settlement was not a settlement with landholders. There were a few, but that was in the later stage. And, for example, a teacher was sent to help the Pitcairners in 1855. And they did receive a land grant.
Over the course of the two periods, did they get any visitors for trading?
Whaling ships and trading ships were always calling in to Norfolk Island. One reason is they could buy stores, but they could also sell stores because they were a trading ship. And it was a stop on the way back from New Zealand back to England for whaling ships.
And what kind of goods were they picking up?
Well, there's actually a record from 1805, which is the shop receipts. And it has individual daily transactions, and it has the name of the person and what they brought. They brought ribbon and yard all the time. And they must have been, by 1805, they must have been the prettiest, best dressed people because they were always buying yard and ribbon. Now, what yard is, I presume, is fabric, and they're always buying ribbon. And on Norfolk Island, if you did extra work for administration, 1802, you got paid in grog. You didn't get paid legal tender. You got paid in grog. So there was also the stills going on Norfolk Island too.
Were they issued with uniforms?
No. The convict arrow really is not relating to the very, very early convicts. The convict arrow meaning the property of the government, that did not come into play until later on. But in 1788, they were not walking around in convict outfits with what people call the convict arrow on it.
Well, that's it for part 1 of our look at Norfolk Island's convict past. Next time, we'll dive into the second settlement, the one they called Hell on Earth. You won't want to miss it. Make sure you're following the podcast so you get part 2 as soon as it drops. Thank you for listening to the Convict Australia podcast. If you'd like to show your appreciation and get more involved, there are a number of ways you can. The first is by signing up to Convict Australia on Patreon, and you will get some perks like the Convict Australia Newsletter. Secondly, leave a review and tell your friends and family. This really does make a huge difference. And lastly, join the Facebook and Instagram group Convict Australia. All the links I've mentioned will be in the show notes. Thank you again. Till next time.